Way Media.
Welcome to episode 105 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning, talking to you from my house here in southeast London. It's boiling hot today, and I'm up in my loft recording this, so I might sound a bit breathless. It's 28 degrees, and in the loft, it's probably about 35. I have an absolute treat for you today. But first of all, welcome to any new listeners, and welcome back to any regular listeners. I do appreciate you joining me once again. And a big special thank you to all of the people that support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon.com/Jamie Benning. Different tiers. Have a look. $12 for an entire year of podcasts you can help support. That's all I'll say about that today. But do check it out if you're in a position to support the podcast. It would be very gratefully received. So back in the first year of doing this podcast, I think it was January 2021. Well, the second year then. So I started in 2020. I spoke to designer, enigma, legend, Nilo Rodis-Jamero. If you don't already know Nilo's work, he worked as a designer on The Empire Strikes Back, as costume designer on Return of the Jedi, and he was production designer on Johnny Mnemonic. He also designed a very well-known animated character, which we're going to talk about. He then went and worked in video games for a number of years and has had so many adventures along the way. Like in this conversation alone, we talk about working with George Lucas and Phil Tippett and Joe Johnston. You'll hear him talking about meeting Eiko Ishioka, the famous designer, his years of working for EA Games and many of the things that went on there. And you'll hear about, maybe in part 2, because this is going to be part 1, by the way. This is a big, long conversation, nearly 3 hours, so I'll split it into 2. But you'll also hear about how Nilo met Shinsaku Tamiya and Osamu Tezuka and even Hayao Miyazaki of Ghibli fame. I mean, Nilo has been around. He's seen a lot of things. He's done a lot of things. He's influenced a lot of filmmaking. You know, in this, we also talk about working with John Hughes, the great John Hughes. Yeah, it's just the mind boggles, really. I do desperately want to go and meet Nilo in person and buy him dinner and have a chat and get to know him more, because we always have such a great time chatting. He goes on to talk about his developing role in the games industry and how he was employed to kind of unblock the creative pipe. And being the wise Yoda-like man that he is, he talks about so many of the lessons he's learned along the way. It's a phrase he uses quite a lot. And what I learned was... So if you want to hear about all those lessons he learned along the way, this is the podcast. Settle down, get a cup of tea, maybe get your headphones on. One thing I will say about this conversation is that, like the conversation in 2021, it was recorded over the phone. Nilo doesn't have a laptop for Zooming or anything like that. It's not the quality that I would normally aim for, but for me, this is not about the quality. This is about the actual content of the conversation, and there's so many wonderful moments in this conversation with Nilo. So here's my conversation with Nilo Rodis-Jamero, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on.
Hey, Jamie.
Hey, Nilo. How you doing?
I'm very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, good. Good. Nice to hear your voice again.
Oh, thank you. Nice to hear your voice again. How was your visit at the ranch?
Oh, it was great. Yeah. I mean, I kind of almost can't believe that it happened in a way, because it just came about. I happened to be, the big show that's in Vegas every year, NAB, the big broadcast technology show.
Yeah.
I was there, and I just happened to post that I was going to do that, and a couple of the guys at Lucasfilm said, "Oh, you should pop up and we'll give you the tour of, at the Presidio. And I thought, okay, great, that sounds good. And then the next thing I know, one of the sound supervisors that I'd interviewed at the ranch, Max Smith, said, "Oh, while you're here, you should come up to the ranch, and I'll give you the tour here."
Oh, nice.
And then, and then an old colleague of mine said, "Oh, you can stay on my boat in Sausalito." So it just sort of all came together, and with sort of last minute.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it was kind of totally out of left field, but yeah, I can tell you, I'm not the most demonstrative person, but the 10-year-old in me was going crazy. It was it was great fun.
Awesome.
Just to be sort of in the place where all of that amazing work was done that I admire so much. Just walking into the Kurosawa room in the ranch and going up to the house and to the library. I didn't get into the archive, unfortunately, but it's just very cool to be there. Somewhere that you know very well, I'm sure.
Very nice. Yeah. I haven't been to Presidio.
You've not been there? Oh, yeah. Well, that is a bit more kind of upfront and corporate. You walk in the front of the building. There's a Yoda fountain, and then you go in, and there's a Darth Vader there and some stormtroopers. And throughout the corridors, there's just this huge display of props and models and matte paintings. That was the thing I loved the most, actually, seeing some of those matte paintings up close. Some of Mike Pangrazio's work and Chris Evans' work.
The old matte paintings.
Yeah, exactly. And also some models, like there was a space shuttle there from, I think, Deep Impact. There was some stuff from Galaxy Quest, stuff from Explorers, which of course you worked on. But yeah, no, it's just a very cool afternoon. And then of course they take you into the gift shop where you in effect pay for your visit because you can't really leave that place without spending a bit of money on a Skywalker Ranch mug or T-shirt.
Nice.
Yeah. What have you been up to?
Not much. I'm working on a project based in Italy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I'm working with a couple of film designers, and I greatly admire them. So working with them has been good fun, and totally out of my depths. I think all of us are out of our depths, but but it's good fun.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Your comfort zone is where you die, isn't it? Really, you have to be out of your comfort zone to live. I think in many cases, I've certainly found that out in later life, probably too late, that I should just throw myself into things more readily and just not worry so much about whether I can or can't do something, because it's like, I think we had this conversation on WhatsApp, didn't we? Phil Tippett saying that you and Joe really had your shit together, and he felt like he hadn't kind of got his skills down, and then you're telling me you felt like a fish out of water, and I'm sure Joe would probably say the same thing.
Yeah, I remember meeting Phil. He really changed my idea of film design. I've been working a few months now at George's house, because there was no ILM at that time.
Yeah.
And every afternoon, George would show up around 1, 2 o'clock maybe, and he would first visit Joe, and then he would come down and see me. George doesn't give assignment. He will just kind of tell you a story or a scene. And it's up to you to figure out how you're going to contribute to that scene.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, because I didn't know anything about the film, I would just listen to him and I go, wow, great story. And then he would leave and I would go, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Because he never really tell you that I want you to do this or that. And Joe does the same thing. Joe and I don't share ideas until we meet with George. Until then, our ideas are separately incubated.
Yeah, well, that was the question I was going to ask you, because I was looking through, and I received a book this morning. Good timing, as a new book about Return of the Jedi just come out, sort of celebrating 40 years. It's called A Visual Guide to Return of the Jedi. And going through there, I could see some of your designs of the speeder bike and some of Joe's, and I could see how sort of different they were. And I did wonder if you were sort of together when you were designing those, or whether you got together during a meeting later on and then kind of took the best bits of both. And that sounds like that's the sort of thing you did.
Yes, that's when we were working separately, and until a couple of weeks later we would meet with George, and George would not explain why he would put a dot on a certain design, and those dotted designs are put aside to one side, and then Joe and I would elaborate on those design direction. I think, neither one of us know where it was going. It just, George likes that direction, we'll go there. And then Joe and I would separate again and then we would come back 2 weeks later, and then we would see each other's designs, and then we would converge again, and then we'd separate again, and then we would converge. And then just the good bits are taken finally at the end. But Phil came in one day, and I've never met him. And at that time, we were designing Yoda.
Yeah.
And Jabba the Hutt. And I always thought of them, Jamie, as humans. So I have the human variation of that design. And Phil showed up with a caterpillar, the caterpillar from what's that?
Alice in Wonderland or something like that?
Alice in Wonderland. And literally, it's a derivation of that design. Where his version of Jabba the Hutt is a fat caterpillar smoking a hookah.
Yeah.
Literally sitting on top of a giant toadstool. And I go, who is this guy and what is he talking about? and George goes, Dad, that's a great idea.
Amazing, yeah.
And I was looking at Phil, and Phil, you've met him.
Yeah.
He's so unconcerned about. He seems oblivious about what's going on, except what he's working on, or he appears to be. Yeah.
Yeah.
And and what he's talking about, he is totally committed to it, and he is, miles and miles deep into that idea. So, and also Phil gave me the idea that actually designing doesn't, the design process is not constricted to paper and pen. I can actually just take anything and present it to George.
Yeah.
He's an extremely good model maker.
Yeah.
So when he showed up with Jabba the Hutt, and Jabba was now a slug, it was like a exclamation point in my head, like, oh, I get it. Anything goes.
Yeah, the ceilings come off. I think Phil had talked as well in the past about how George reacted to 3D little maquettes because he could hold them and look at them from every angle, whereas a sketch, you're always kind of wondering what's on the other side of that sketch. So did you go down the route of sculpting things?
No, I made models, but not sculpting.
Right, yeah.
So I would make very rough models of what I have in mind. In those days, we just bashed kits. So I would make quick models. Joe would make quick models also when both of us are separately frustrated by pen and paper. You can only go so deep with that pen and paper. And the model shop is just down the corner from us, and we would just walk over there, and there is Joe working on his idea, and I would work on my idea, but separately. We never go, so how about this, Joe? And, we don't. We converge later on when George shows up. and we would be joined either by Phil or by Ralph McQuarrie.
Were you bashing model kits together, like Tamiya model kits and models of tanks and planes and stuff, in the same way that the ILM model makers were? Or were you making stuff out of card and paper and whatever else you had to hand?
Sometimes cardboard. It's whatever is conveniently, whatever conveniently within my grasp.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie, when I was in school, when we were given design assignment, like a quick design assignment, we were given like 3 hours to sketch the idea, but also model that idea as quickly as possible. So we can hold it and, walk around it. And usually we just grab whatever it is that within our grasp, right? We don't go outside the room. So you just do with whatever you have. If you don't have, sticky tape, then, you fold paper until, it kind of resembles what you have in mind. So having all the Tamiya kits there was like heaven to me. And having those magic glue that you can bash kits very quickly. But usually I just do that as a vehicle to forward my pen and paper design. Now I can see around the corner. Yeah. So it was fun.
It was fun hearing Lorne Peterson. When I first got in contact with Lorne Peterson, I sent you this message, but I just wanted to read it out now, just so the listeners can hear as well. I asked Lorne to come onto the podcast, and of course I sent him a link to the episode of us two talking, you and me. And he said, "Hi Jamie, just listened to the episode with Nilo and was nearly brought to tears. My voice broke up when I tried to speak. It was an epic 33 years with many a milestone along the way, and every week brought new adventures, each day actually. We got to work and live in Florence in the Renaissance. I'll be in touch in a day or two." So that conversation that you and I had really sold the podcast to him, because we had such a nice conversation that day. And, Lorne is just on the other side of where you were, of course, in the place that you're describing right now, where you would go over to the model shop and bash Tamiya kits together. So Lorne was there making the models from the designs that you'd come up with. What was your kind of reaction in seeing some of the work that Lorne did on your designs?
Incredibly thrilled that Lorne, how do I explain this? Lorne, especially Lorne, more than any other model maker, I could walk over there with a sketch, and if I don't make a quick sketch, a quick maquette of what I have in mind, he will make that maquette, literally within hours.
Really? Wow.
And then he would walk back to me and, is this what you have in mind? Or this is my variation of that design. And usually I just go, I'm floored. That's way more than I have in mind. I don't have anything to add. Also, he is practical in that when he does a version of the sketch, he has in mind how it's going to be photographed and how it's going to be mounted, and what is the chassis holding that together, and what are the electronics that's holding it together, and I don't think about that at all. I just think of, what does it look like? How does it behave? And how should the wing fold and all of that? Lord has to figure that out while he is making this maquette or, a rough model of what we have in mind.
So you're not constrained in your initial design in that way then, because you're not having to consider those.
No, I'm more expansive, because I know that they will take that idea and run with it. I can only take my idea so far.
Yeah.
Whereas now they can, playing music with my guitar.
Mm.
And then I take it to Lorne, and Lorne make it into an orchestra.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and there's really once Lorne takes hold of that design, I usually step back because I'm just in awe and what these guys can do.
Yeah. I wonder if one of those designs would be like the medical frigate that you designed for Empire. That I think was it initially, it was like going to be based on like an outboard engine or something, and then you expanded on that idea.
Yes, you know, I like iconic design I usually design with kids in mind.
Mm.
You know, if people or kids that can't draw but can remember it,
Mm-hmm.
I feel that my design, because it's just a visual idea at that stage, yeah, that, you know, kids can now draw it very quickly.
Mm.
I don't like design, Jamie, that they, you know, the audience have to struggle to, like, what is that?
Mm.
You know, I like them to immediately see what it is, or grab grab the totality of it, and then as they zoom in, you know, they enjoy the details of it.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
So that ship that you were talking about, you know, I started out literally taking an outboard engine, an outboard motor, and then just tilting it sideways. I go, you know, it has a very nice, readable shape. So how do I make this into a ship?
Mm.
And usually, abstraction like that, I can take that to the model shop and they can run with it, and you have to leave them alone.
Mm.
Yeah, because they have to interpret your design, and you have to, you know, you have to let go of your paper and pen design. It's now moved onto 3D, and they have better grasp of it than I would ever.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm looking at that design now, and I guarantee that hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of kids would have gone home after seeing The Empire Strikes Back for the first time, and they would have drawings in their little notepads and in the back of their school exercise books, and because those designs are so iconic, aren't they? I mean, I just as you're talking about it, I'm not an artist by any means, but I can approximate the shape of that ship with basically, you know, 5 lines or something. So you've got that long piece on the back that's dangling down. You've got this sort of long bridge that's a long tunnel kind of thing that's coming out, the neck, and then you've got the head of the thing. And I could show that to lots of people who are sort of movie aware, and they would identify that immediately. So you're absolutely right about that iconic nature. Yeah.
You know, I tend to design that way. I like design that are very simple to digest,
Mm.
and then, you know, reward the viewer with more details as they zoom in.
Mm. Mm.
And yeah,
But when we spoke last time, you at one point, I listened back to the interview the last couple of days. You at one point went to mention that you were asked by, I think it was John Lasseter, to come in and design a character, and you didn't go any further than that. But can you describe that story, or tell us that story about designing a character for Toy Story?
yeah, I had for a couple of years I didn't do anything but surf.
Mm.
I literally surfed every day. You know, my car was a rusty hulk of a car after 2 years because it was just so, you know, it was always on the you know, on the beach. But one day I got a call from John Lasseter, and he asked me, you know, can you drop by the studio?
Mm.
And you know, I thought we were just gonna have a cup of coffee or something.
Mm.
You know, so went over there and we had a chat, and he showed me what was at that time called Lunar Larry. And John said that Katzenberg was losing patience with them because they couldn't get this one character right.
Mm.
And you know, can I have a crack at it? So I explained to John that, or John's time that I work in an increment of a month.
Mm.
So if can we agree on my terms? And John goes, yeah, no problem. So I went home and literally still salt encrusted, yeah, because I was surfing that day. Came home and literally just did a couple of sketches with what John had given me as an idea.
Mm.
Came home literally at something like 1:00. I faxed John a page of what I had in mind, of what I understood him to be his design parameter.
Mm.
And John faxed that to Katzenberg. And literally within minutes, Katzenberg wrote over it and said, "This is it, stop." So John faxed that back to me, and I go, great. And at that time, all I was concerned about is, can you give me my month's fee? So 2 years later, or a year and a half later, they finally paid me.
Wow. Jeez.
Because the argument that the Disney producer had been talked to me about was, how long did it take you to do this, Nilo? And I told him, I told him 40 years.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the answer you should give.
And they, give you 2 hours. And I go, no, you agreed on this. So
Yeah.
this is our agreement. And, and I really wanted to production design that movie.
Mm.
And that was my understanding with John also. But because we got stuck on this thing, like, what was it that I was supposed to bring to this project?
Mm.
And I told him, I don't think I need to tell you what I could bring to the project. I stayed this one character.
Mm.
And anyway, so meantime, I went out to do Johnny Mnemonic, and when I came back, we were still talking about it. And I go, you know what? This is never going to go anywhere.
Mm.
Or I'm not going to go anywhere with this project. So, but it was fun. And then years later, a couple of years later, the movie finally was released, and I ran into John at the airport one day, and he goes, "Hey, did you see the movie?" And at that time, I hadn't seen the movie. And did you see your name? We could, you were in that movie. We gave you credit, and I was really stunned. And I thought, wow, and all the crew got a gift pack at the end of the show, and John also sent me that pack, and I was really impressed by John.
Nice. I'm looking at the design now. I don't know how early this sketch is, or, I mean, you said you did it in a matter of hours, but the essence of that character is right there, facially, like his expressions, his costume, his stance, like it's all there. It's all there in those early concepts. Amazing.
The proportion is there, which is what I was concerned about. And the rest of the details, I thought we'll sort that out later, but this is the proportion that I saw, this size head, and very simple to draw, yeah? And kid-friendly.
Yes, yeah. That comes from your experience of making Ewoks, Nilo.
Yeah. That was another one.
One thing we didn't talk about, and you just mentioned it actually in passing there, Johnny Mnemonic. That was a big film at the time. You were production designer on that?
Yes.
And so that was a step up for you in some ways.
It was. I remember being called to fly down to LA and meet with this director I've never heard of. But I'm a great fan of William Gibson's writing.
Mm-hmm.
So when I read the script, they sent me the script the night before, and I read the script and I thought, this movie this script is wonderfully written. It's how do I explain this? The design is between words.
Yeah.
You feel that you are there, but the way it's written by William, he doesn't really tell you what it is. It makes you feel what it is.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So I thought, I want a shot at this. So I went down to LA and met with Robert Longo.
Yeah.
What my role was going to be. I was just asked to have a meet, to meet him, and didn't think much about it. And I got a call from the producer and said, Robert really likes you. Would you like to production design this? So off I go to Toronto. And, at that time, we started designing sets without knowing who the star was going to be.
Yeah.
It's going to be Johnny Mnemonic.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, they were scrambling to figure out who Johnny Mnemonic was going to be.
Mm.
And they came up with Val Kilmer.
Mm-hmm.
So Val Kilmer spent a week in Toronto. And after a week, he decided he didn't want to have anything to do with it.
Right.
So we continue production design, and the shooting schedule is now coming ever so close. We still don't have Johnny Mnemonic. And, I have to tell you, Jamie, what a wonderful script that was. How do I visualize this world? And finally, Keanu Reeves signed up. And, wonderful kid. He really is. Robert had directed an episode of a TV series.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't sure what it was. I think it was Tales of the Crypt.
Yes.
And I never saw that, but I got on well with Robert. But Robert came from a very different discipline. I remember one day I started reading about Robert, and he would do theater design, he would do wax design, big wax model, he would do installation design, he would do graphite drawing on big, really billboard size canvas. And I remember having a conversation with Robert and go, wow, so many disciplines that that you control. However do you do this? And Robert looked at me quizzically, and he goes, Nilo, you hire people to do that. I was blown away. I didn't know that, artists in the past, Leonardo and all of these people also did that. Yeah. They had other people do preliminary works and they would finish it. I didn't know that. And, Robert explained to me that that's how his world is. You hire people that can actually draw and you just direct them to do that. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. But, I was in that show for over a year.
Right.
In Toronto. It was a good learning experience. Didn't quite match what I have in mind. And years later, Matrix came up.
Yeah.
And I thought that's what Johnny Mnemonic was attempting to do.
So do you think it was just a mismatch of the script and the director ultimately, not wanting to point the finger? But he was as you say, he was an artist of many different forms, but he was sort of predominantly known for music videos, wasn't he? Leading up to doing that Tales of the
Oh,
Crypt.
what?
Music videos for REM
Yeah.
and yeah.
It's a puzzle to me sometimes, Jamie, how movies are made or how they come about to be made. Oftentimes getting a movie made is more interesting than the movie itself.
Yeah.
Because it's such high drama on how it got there for however many millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, and they're betting on it, on this script and on this actor. What I enjoyed about Johnny Mnemonic was being able to help Robert realize what he has in mind or what he had in mind. Because Robert didn't know anything about visual effects. I was schooled in the George Lucas way of doing movies, where you do a lot of pre-production first. Don't hire anybody else. Just get the pre-production right, and then and then you start filling in the crew. And you give that crew the way George does it is that there's a big storyboard. Everything is storyboarded, and that becomes biblical. Literally, you follow that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, initial storyboard would literally end up all the way to the end of production. I'm always surprised how many of the storyboard that we did is transferred all the way to the end. But movies are not done the way George does it.
Yeah.
George had this on the studio, so he can fend off other people in the beginning. So there's just designers like Joe, myself, and Ralph, and that would go on for at least a year, just us for a year, while the crew is busy doing something else. Yeah, and then once that Bible is set, then George starts bringing in people. What I finally learned, what Johnny Mnemonic taught me was that movies are literally, movie schedule are literally backed into a hard date, which is the release date. Then they green light the movie that actually with a budget that actually will not make that movie.
Yeah.
And on a time schedule that is almost impossible to make. It's the opposite of how George makes movies. So I learned how to do movies the way George, makes movies. Johnny Mnemonic taught me that the way Hollywood movies are made, it's the opposite of that. You back into a hard deadline with a limited budget and limited time. Now, the only other producer I eventually ran into and worked with that had the same idea as George was John Hughes.
Yeah.
In that John would just sit by himself and, occasionally call me in for a meeting. I don't know if I told you this story about John Hughes.
I think you mentioned him, that you nearly worked on a movie together and the plug was pulled.
Yes. A couple of those movies, actually 3 movies that I can, on top of my head, that we were working on that was plugged, was unplugged. But I remember John, sent me a script, and and then he called me a couple of nights later and said, come over to Chicago, let's discuss this script. And usually I would write notes. What is the most important part? Where do we put our money in? What is the most iconic visual cue that that we can hang this movie onto? And I was so giddy with the script that I read that I went to Chicago with just a CD of music that I thought this movie should be based on. Not design, but music.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't come up with any design ideas, but I had an idea of what the music ought to be. And I remember that was the first time that I, flying to Chicago, I go, this is committing harakiri. Because I'm a designer and I'm going to talk to John about music. So I met with John at his house, and he said, so, Nilo, what do you have? After all the preliminary conversations, so what do you have? What do you think? And I said, well, I have this CD of this, an artist named Juan Garcia Escobar. And there is a particular music, a particular, I think, number 6 or whatever, can you play that? And he looked at it, and he went to his cupboard in his studio, and it's lined by a lot of CDs because John loves music. And he picked that one up, and wouldn't you know it, it's the same CD, and it had a note in it. And John mentioned that the music that I have in mind was exactly the same music that he had in mind while he was writing it.
No way.
And that was my initial meeting with John, or my second meeting with John. So he said, you should direct this movie. You understand this movie. And I said, John, I'll produce that movie for you, but I don't want to direct. I like the idea of helping somebody make the movie. I have worked with George that has a very clear idea of what he has in mind. Very, very clear idea of what he had in mind. I was really, how do I explain this? I was uncomfortable of taking John's idea and making it mine. I can't get into his head, and so I declined. The movie was never really made. It went from studio to studio to studio, and then it just sort of disappeared. But it was a great movie. It could have been a great movie.
Do you ever regret that decision, or it sounds like it was the right decision? But do you ever regret not having that chance to direct?
No, because I didn't feel that I had that calling to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And he was the better man for the job, I guess. Yeah.
I didn't have a burning desire to direct. I like to see it through, and I'd like to guide it. John sent me to New York one day based on this incredibly simple movie called Tippett. And, he asked me to set up a production in New York. And, I was there for almost 6 months. And then eventually the movie was called off. We were getting ready to do, to start building sets, and it was called off. And it's high politics of movie making. We like you, but we want you to do a movie for us. And I know you like to make that movie, but we'll help you make that movie. But what we really want you to do is this movie that we have in mind.
Right? Yeah.
And oftentimes the studio allows you to move along with that idea, knowing full well that the studio will ultimately cancel that production. And, I've experienced that many times during my career in movies, where they would just the studio would allow you to go so far and then shut down, because what they really want you is to do this other movie that they have in mind.
Yeah.
I heard that George Clooney is oftentimes makes a deal with studio. He will do a studio movie or two studio movies to his one movie.
Yeah, right.
And oftentimes the movie that, in this case, George Clooney would make is not a big studio movie, but it's a passion project. Now, Johnny Mnemonic was like that to me, where I didn't feel like it was ever gonna go. You know, I felt that they wanted William Gibson for another movie.
Yeah.
It just felt that way, that it just crept along, and I go, they can't possibly continue to do this, because it has no momentum. Usually a movie has a momentum going in. Ultimately, they were trying to figure out how could they, because it was shot here in Canada. And to shoot in Canada and get a production budget credit, where the Canadian government will give you X amount of money, of a percentage of your budget if you shoot in Canada. But you have to have Canadian content to it, meaning you have to have a Canadian actor, Canadian production designer, Canadian cinematographer. So they eventually came up to me and said, we have this problem, where we need Canadian content in this movie. And I remember sitting down and said, why are you talking to me? And eventually they told me that to a production designer count as 1 point to getting Canadian tax credit.
Right.
And since I already signed up on the deal, what would it take for me to leave the show?
My goodness.
That was a question, that was tabled.
Wow.
So I called up my wife. I said, I don't know if I told you this, but I asked her, how much do we owe on our mortgage in our house? And she told me a number. And I went back to the studio and said, pay me this, and you got a deal. I'll walk out.
Huh.
And I thought, that would be a good deal, for me as well as for them. But eventually, they were, we were lucky that Keanu signed to do the project, because Keanu held something like 5 points because he was the lead actor.
Right.
Yeah. So politics.
Yeah. Never simple, is it? I think people always have this impression with movies that, they're designed and they're made, and if they fail, then it's the fault of the filmmakers alone, not the actual, the studio or all the multitude of politics that go into it. I mean, that film...
Oh, it's amazing.
Certainly from a design point of view, that film certainly could have felt sort of more majestic, it could have had and just from its execution, it felt like the film almost was great, It
needed a powerful director and a powerful producer in concert with a powerful director to realize it. Because to make a movie, I remember vividly one day, towards the end of the show, the producer said something that shocked me. I was operating on the basis that the budget was X amount of money. Yeah. 60 cents, right, to the dollar. And what he told me was the budget was actually 100. And I go, but I designed it around the smaller budget that you told me. So that's another producerial game that I realized that's also constantly being played, within the within the production of a movie. Producer oftentimes, from my experience, sometimes they don't tell you the actual budget in the hopes that it can be done for a smaller budget, making them look like a hero. I don't care about that, because to me, a movie, once it's committed to a film, you cannot erase it.
Mm.
You know, so you may have saved the studio X amount of money, but you did not achieve what that movie was trying to achieve.
Mm. Mm.
You know, and that that learning to me was the realization that I really wanted to produce movies, not direct movies. Because I saw uh, the political game that's being played.
Mm.
So, I like, so that's what I learned about that. That was a big learning for me.
Mm. Well, another film that you worked on that we didn't talk about last time, and I used to love this film when I was a kid. I haven't revisited, I don't think, in a very long time, but Explorers, the Joe Dante film. That was another film that was kind of troubled. I mean, this is, 10 years before Johnny Mnemonic, but this is another film that was troubled.
Yeah.
Didn't kind of get finished in a way. The end. I mean, I don't really remember the ending. My memories of it are the kids all getting together and building the ship, and all of that stuff, and getting into space. That was the cool part for me. But that was another troubled movie, wasn't it? What was that like? And what was Joe Dante like to work for?
So Joe Dante is a blast to work with.
Mm.
You know, he's good fun. He is a consummate. He is a consummate movie consumer.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, Joe's religion is movies.
Mm. Mm.
He literally he can dissect movies. He can zoom in on a movie, and what he's really good at is Looney Tunes kind of movie.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I didn't know Joe at that time, but reading the script by Eric Luke, and I thought, what good fun is this? This is terrific fun. I want to work on this. And actually, at ILM, everybody wanted to work on it because Joe is such a wonderful, fun person to work with.
Mm.
And what a wonderful read this script was. And we were in pre-production, and they did a screen test of the guy who played the alien who is now on Star Trek. Played the dad alien and the boy alien. There was a girl alien and the boy alien. I was going to say his name is Joe Picardo. So they did a film test. We did the film test, and there he is as an alien. And, the camera is just on a static camera. And he walks in, and he does one liner after another, and it was hilarious. And I thought, this guy is, he's a comedian. This is great. This is going to be funny. But I never thought that the movie would be changed because of that, because of that one casting. And literally, the movie pivoted on that one character.
Mm-hmm.
So he came in. It became Looney Tunes, right? It was just one joke after another, and the script changed. Somehow, it moved towards that direction. But originally, it was not. It was telling a story about these three adventurers, and somehow it got hijacked by that. So the movie pivoted to that direction. And when it was screened, a lot of the test result was the audience didn't understand what was going on, because it suddenly stopped. It almost screeched to a halt, and this comedian came in, does one liner after another, and I remember George Lucas saying, he watched the movie and it was good fun with the kids, and he died when the alien came in. And I thought, great observation.
Yeah, that was Robert Picardo.
Robert Picardo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he ended up in, he was in Deep Space Nine, I think, wasn't he? One of the Star Treks.
Yes.
I think he played the Doctor or something. Yeah, I never watched that, but
yeah. But he was not. But his talent is really a comedy. But he transitioned into straight acting.
Yeah.
So I realized that somehow during the production, Joe Dante's idea of craziness, because Looney Tunes is crazy, right? But you have to embrace that craziness. Like Jim Carrey on The Mask, you run with it.
Yeah.
And you just you live in that world, and that movie, Eric Luke's script for the Explorers, was about exploring, but somehow it disappeared halfway through the movie because of Robert Picardo.
Yeah, I think I also read that the production cut. Didn't the studio change hands in the middle of production as well, and kind of the movie had to be finished quicker? I'm sure I heard Joe say that at one point.
Well, we shot for over 100 days.
Oh, really? Wow.
It was, and all the time there was constant hassle with the studio and Joe. And that's never a good thing. I don't know what the reason behind that fight, but somewhere along the way, the relationship changed, and either Joe did not get the full support of the studio, or the studio changed its direction, or Joe Dante changed his direction. But, I remember Eric Luke was the up-and-coming writer. He was written up in a lot of movie blogs that, this is a hot writer coming up. And, after the movie released, it just sort of disappeared.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of amazing. Like you said, you sometimes wonder how movies get made. I mean, it's no surprise that people have tried to make movies in the fashion that George and you and Joe and all those other amazing artists made, in the Star Wars movies and in the Indiana Jones movies, because seemingly all the ingredients can be found, right? Like in the case of Explorers or Johnny Mnemonic. So the ingredients are there, but ultimately
the basic ingredients is there, yeah.
Yeah, but ultimately it comes down to finding a team that you can work with, but also a team that you can give that kind of creative freedom to. And creative freedom is kind of, well, let's put it this way round. Budget constraints are the enemy of creative freedom in many ways. And, as we know, this is business, and business and art don't always mix, do they?
I appreciate, we all appreciate budget constraint. That's how the world is. We appreciate hard deadline. I've really learned about hard deadline that when I moved into to start designing games, producing games. Games. Yeah, I'll come back to what we were talking about, but it just triggered an episode that I learned about games. That is what I've learned about movies is you do hard deadline, you appreciate hard deadline, and you appreciate hard schedule and hard budget. These budgets doesn't move, this schedule doesn't move, and the essence of this production is this, right? It's about exploring, right? And you bring in a director that you trust, and the studio and the director have a good relationship, and the movie is made. But what I've learned about movies is that there is a hard deadline that you must be accountable for. And everything revolves around that hard deadline. Ideas, budget revolves around that. So in games, Jamie, there is no hard deadline.
Really? Yeah.
Because usually a game company like EA, they are also the distributor, or in the game language, the publisher. Right? They produce the game and they also publish the game, or they distribute the game. And what I've learned about while I was at EA is that hard deadline is not really hard deadline. In fact, there is no hard deadline. There is this game. I'm used to the discipline between the design, the lighting, the script, all the discipline of movie making. Once we are given that script, we don't fuck around with that script. Yeah, that's what we signed to do, and now we're gonna focus our talent and our time into that script. We don't change that. That's a given now. In games, because there is no hard deadline, there becomes, how do I explain this? Because there is no hard deadline, you can sort of meander around. Yeah? And this meandering, as far as I'm concerned, is a killer, because it does not train people to immediately go after the meat of that project. I'll sort of find the meat of that project along the way, and I'll go, no, you don't. And also the discipline between producer, director, production designer, lighting, I don't make comments about the script. I don't make comments about lighting. I don't make comments about the hair or the costume. That's not my department. My department is design the movie. And we respect that border. In games, I remember my first production design meeting on games. There was about 100 of us in this room. And I started looking around at who makes decisions. Usually it's just a producer director. There's two people, and what comes out of that is the direction. Here's what we're going to do. And I remember after that meeting, I asked, who is building the game? Since we all have this meeting for 2 days, literally the production grinds to a halt, because all of us are in this meeting. And, I remember somebody raising their hands, and they said, I don't like green. And I go, who is that guy? I go, oh, he is a coder. And I go, well, you can code. Don't tell me about color.
Yeah, too many cooks.
Way too many cooks. So one day, all the executives at EA was summoned to Vancouver from all over the world. Yeah, they came here and we had a big meeting. And at the time, I sat on the left side or the right side of the CEO of the company, because it somehow, it's a long story, but somehow that's where I ended up with. I ended up in this meeting. And the question of the day was, why does our producer suck? Literally, that's it.
Wow.
And everybody was summoned. And now, so that question was asked, and then everybody was asked why. And I go, wow, I don't know. I'm new here. But I have some observation, because I've run into these sort of problems during meeting, but I don't know games, so I'm totally not equipped to answer any of these meetings, nor should I be in this room. So it went around the table, but mercifully it went away from me. So by the time it circled back to me, it has been like 45 minutes or an hour by the time it came to me. Yeah, everybody had their say around this table. So finally, when it came to me, and all of them said something nice, couched it in such a way that it was not abrasive. By the time it came to me, I'm the new kid in the block, right?
Mm.
And all eyes now come to me. And finally, the CEO, Don Matrick, asked me, "So Nilo, why does our producer suck?" And I said, "Our producers suck because there is no union in this game.
Mm-hmm.
There's," and they go, and everybody, like cartoons where sweats are flying from everybody's head or faces.
Yeah.
Like I had said something so wrong, and and Don asked me, "Can you elaborate on that?" And I said, "Here's my learning on movie making. We have a hard deadline, and because we are committed to that hard deadline, we don't dare go over each day. We don't go over the allotted time.
Mm-hmm.
At 5 o'clock, we shut down, whether we got it or not.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we go over a minute, now we have to bring in catering. We have to bring in drivers. We have to bring in all of these other people, and that's what the union does. That's the hard commitment of a hard deadline. And I was asked to elaborate some more. And I said, yeah, for example, when you guys walk into this building, you walk into this corridor, right? And in the corridor, you saw big posters. But the corridor is lined with these posters that the producer of this game asked the production crew to do these posters so that by the time you walk in here, you have an idea of what this game is about. Let me tell you how many times that posters were done because the colors were wrong, or the colors were off, or the fonts were wrong. Did you guys pay attention to that? And they said, we didn't even see the poster. Of course you don't. But yet, the crew was killed by the producers to do that over and over and over again, that they actually stayed overnight to redo that again just for today's meeting.
Wow.
So a lot of people were killed taking this beachhead because we don't care, because there is no overtime. And because there is no overtime, the producers will just keep saying, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it again. Because when you look at the budget, because there is no overtime, it feels like, yeah, it was done on budget, but it's not. A lot of people were killed along the way. But because we don't tabulate those how many times it was done, when those producers moved on, what the other crew has learned, that you can actually do this. When I become a producer, someday when I become a producer, I can run the crew just like this. So there's no discipline in. I thought the discipline in games was lacking compared to movies because there is no overtime, and because there is no union overseeing those overtime. Yeah, when you go over the scheduled shooting, there is serious money ramification. There is budget ramification on that. You don't go 1 minute over, because the increment is actually not minutes; it goes into 5 hours. Or whatever the union has agreed, right? And as a producer in movies, I've learned to discipline myself. That I learned how to make calls to stop it before 5 o'clock. Make sure that we are not over scheduled. But that presupposes, Jamie, that we all know what is not what we can give away and what we should win for this script or for this shooting date or shooting day or the entire movie. You know, I know that visually, if you just walk away in movies after seeing the movie, and you can visually explain what the movie is, that movie is successful.
Yeah, true.
You know, if you don't, and usually I focus as a production designer or a producer, I focus on that one key moment of that movie. I want to secure this, and everything else I'm willing to let go.
Mm.
I'm willing to put up a fight on those other fronts, but this one I gotta win.
Mm.
So as a production designer, I usually make sure that I design that set, and the other ones I let go. I let others design, because they need to experience that also, as an art director, right? What I've learned about video games was they needed a bit more discipline.
Mm-hmm.
So when my time was up, they were looking at me and they all looked really scared for me. And I didn't understand why. And when everybody was left, when everybody was gone in that room and I was sitting there, there was another guy that was sitting there all by himself, and he walked over to me and said, "Did you know that Don Matrick and Chris Lee, Paul Lee, and did you know that the reason we don't have overtime is because Don Matrick, the CEO of the company, made a deal with Vancouver. They were actually responsible for making sure that there was no overtime. Or they don't pay for overtime, and there is no union." I thought, okay, my career is over in games.
And what happened? Well, I hope you enjoyed my conversation there with Nilo as much as I did. That was just part one. Hopefully you're looking forward to part two, where he goes on to talk about so many other surprising things that I didn't know about him. It's very difficult to do research on Nilo. As I said at the start, he is a bit of an enigma, but we've become quite friendly. And something incredible happened just last week. So last year when I released my Return of the Jedi book, I said to Nilo, I texted him and I said, "I'd love to send you a copy." And he said, "Oh, JB, we'll do a trade." So I sent him a copy. And then just this June, the first anniversary of the book's release came around. And I said, "Oh, Nilo, did you ever get the book? We never chatted about it." He said, "Oh, Jamie, I forgot to do our trade." He said, "I'll send you something in the post." And just a couple of weeks later, the most amazing package that's ever arrived on my door turned up. It was original drawings by Nilo, done for me, of Slave One, of Boba Fett in the Sarlacc, of a snow speeder, of a speeder bike with an Ewok hanging off it. Original drawings, some of them painted and coloured, others just with a ballpoint pen, as he talks about in our conversation. And they're for me. He did them just for me. He said, "I had a great time doing them for you and knowing how much you'd enjoy them. And my goodness, do I enjoy them. I'm now looking into getting them framed in UV glass and protected forevermore." I mean, these are kind of heirlooms, really. But regardless of the value monetarily, the value to me of making this friendship with Nilo and him going out of his way to do that for me is just kind of mind-blowing. His name is a name that I've known since I was 5 years old, reading it in books. The making of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi a couple of years later. And to think that we're now friends chatting and he's sending me a gift, kind of blows my mind. So listen in for episode 2 of this conversation, in which we go into even more amazing stories with Nilo. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
we are being way meaty.